Hi, everybody. Susan Clinton here with Tough to Treat episode number 134. This is one of our short ones that we started putting out a couple of months ago. This one is from me talking about the gut-brain axis in a course that I teach. It's really about the axis response to stress, to pain, and to how we balance in our life. I hope you enjoy it. I look forward to hearing any comments you may have about it. Enjoy the podcast. Once upon a time, back in the 70s, when I was in PT school, we learned a lot about top-down. So everything happened from the head, and it all went down to the body this way. And the brain told the body what to do. And if the brain had an injury, then we didn't have good information going down to the rest of the body. So that whole thing would run away. And we'd end up with limbs that didn't move or limbs that only moved in a, kind of a pattern of movement that was very reflexive, and it didn't have isolated control. And so the belief was, and the work was always top down, top down, top down. How do we get things to change? And then, through a lot of work of just very dedicated movement professionals, including the Bobaths, and then we're down the pathway to the work of Shumway Cook and all of the other thought leaders, we learned that there was a lot more to interaction and skill development rather than just top down, that there was a great amount that happened coming up from the body as well. And as we moved into more neurophysiological work, we began to understand that the parasympathetic systems and the sympathetic systems were not singular, but they're binary, meaning in the splanchnic pathway, you have sympathetics and parasympathetics. And in the parasympathetic pathway, you have sympathetics and parasympathetics. Now, it's predominantly parasympathetic, but there are sympathetics in this system to help balance that out. And both of these systems have to work together. They're always seeking balance, okay? Always seeking balance. So if we've got our foot on the gas pedal all the time, we're going to have a consequential rise in the output from the vagal pathway as well, because it's going to come up to try to seek balance to that overproducing splanchnic pathway. Same thing. When we have the vagal pathway, we've got our foot off the brake, off the brake, off the brake. This also comes down. And so we get into that kind of there's good and bad to being down. The good is that we can kind of take a rest. The bad is we never want to get up again. We become a sloth. And the bad about being on all the time is that we can't come down. But we have to get a little bit anxious, or we don't learn, we don't change, we don't act. And the only way that we're going to act is if there's a change requiring us to act. And so that's kind of the information from the body that comes up, tells the brain something. The brain has to process that. It's got to do something with all those processes. It attaches an emotion to it. And that emotion is what begins to make us take action. So if the emotion that is attached to it is like freeze, that's what we're going to do. If the emotion that's attached to it is like run for the hills, we're going to run for the hills. If the emotion that's attached to it is severe aggression, we're going to fight. If so the brain attaches emotions to this information coming in to require action on our part. That's why that happens. The other piece is that we not only have I brain, which is what I call this part of the brain here, the cerebral cortex and limbic system, but we have old brain, which a lot of people will call lizard brain. I don't like to think of it having a lizard in my head. That really bothers me, that picture. So I've named it old brain. And old brain has been with us. That's the brain that I share familiarity with the people that have been on this earth for 3 million years at least. So Lucy's remains in Ethiopia are 3 million years old. So we've been walking the earth for a long time. So we have I brain, old brain. And remember, old brain that's the brain stem and the hypothalamus. The job of old brain is individual survival. That's its job, is to keep you alive. It exists for that very reason. Everything about it is to keep you alive and to take care of the back processes so that I brain can do all of its very powerful intellectual, personality, relationship building, thought processing, all that stuff that makes you uniquely you, which is why I call it I brain. And along with I brain and connecting to old brain is the limbic system. So we have emotions, and emotions can drive both systems, and both systems can drive emotions. They're learned behaviors, and those emotions that get attached to things are designed to build behaviors, and behaviors are what makes change happen. So in other words, the brain wants us to act, or we need to act, but we have to. There's always an emotion attached to it, which is why the limbic system comes in and plays such a huge part in pain, right? Because, pain drives fear, fear drives pain. Pain drives reactions to stress drives pain. It's all part of that limbic system involvement. Pleasure, joy, we seek that. But we get too much of it, it becomes a problem. And we have like little shut-off valves that say, oh, that's a little too much of a good thing. Or it's such a good thing that we keep seeking it elsewhere. And so then we start having behaviors that drive us to other riskier behaviors, other places, trying to seek that same high. Okay, but that's what happens. That's how that works. And so then we also have what we call, this is what I call gut brain. And this is exactly how I do it with my patients. I draw a brain. I have the little, thing coming here. I draw the gut. We've got little hands that come up this way and feet. And we just call it gut brain, eye brain, and old brain. And I draw that out for my clients as we're talking, just so that they can kind of understand. And gut brain is becoming one of the things that we're learning neurophysiologically as the thing that's really running the show here. We can have all the best processes and all the wonderful things up here, but if all of our little bacteria that live here, all the little bugs that live in here, are all screaming for sugar, they're going to override any thought process we have up here about not eating sugar, because they're going to be so loud and they're going to be over invading the informational stuff coming in that they start, kind of like hijacking the eye brain and it takes up all the system processes in the eye brain. This is why people have trouble, because they say it's a matter of willpower, sticking to like an eating program or this or that. It has nothing to do with it at all. It has everything to do with how loud these guys are. So, and we'll talk more about how we deal with that system later, but this system is very important. The other thing about gut brain here is 90%, I think the latest one said 75 to 90% of serotonin, that this stuff that eye brain needs to make good decisions, to do its processing, to not have brain fog, to feel really good, to feel smart, to have memory, to do all of the things that eye brain does. 90% of it is manufactured in the gut. Okay, it's not manufactured up here. It doesn't come up here. It's manufactured in here, and the only way it can be manufactured here by what we eat, all right, in our endocrine system, and governed by inflammation. All of those different processes is going to tell us how much serotonin we're going to make. And here's the thing. I want everybody to just think back to this. This is a real simple way to kind of pull it together. Just think back to the last time you had such a good night's sleep and you woke up the next morning and that amazing feeling that you had. I mean, you could do anything. You could conquer the world. You are the superhero of your life at that moment. That feeling right there is because you rested enough and got enough sleep that you had the maximum production of serotonin. And as you wake up, your eye brain was flooded with it. And that's serotonin working at its best. Here's another thing that also helps understand this. Have you ever been at the end of a day? It may not have even had to have been the most stressful day, but it was just the end of a day, and there's a lot of things going on. There's schedules, there's moving parts, there's things that need to happen the next day, there's a trip looming in the foreground, there's phone calls that didn't get made, there's and all of a sudden it just all builds up like there is absolutely no way I can get all this done. I can't do it. I can't figure it out. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so what you end up doing is your brain just says, just go to bed. We'll try to figure this out in the morning. And you probably learned that a long time ago, because when you were stressed and upset as a kid, not being able to figure something out, what did the adults say? Sleep on it. It'll be different in the morning. It's just sometimes problems resolve at nighttime. Well, the reason that happens is because we manufacture serotonin. It gets upstairs to our brain and we wake up the next day and we look at it and it's like, oh, this here, this here, this here, this here, this, that. Everything's good. What was I worried about? That's what happens. When we have people who are having a lot of GI system issues, they're not able to manufacture the serotonin that gets up here. And that's why we have the behavioral changes with people with chronic GI system issues, in a nutshell. I know it seems a little bit, should be more complicated than that. And there's lots of neurotransmitters and things that go on. But in a nutshell, this is what happens. So what we want to think about is all of the things that can influence the gut. So the brain can influence the gut, like our response to stress. So stress isn't a bad thing. It's not. In fact, we need to have stress. We won't change. We won't act. We won't eat. We won't hunt. We won't do all of the things that we need to do in our life without stress. Stress is actually good for us. It's our response to stress that's not so bueno. There's a book here that was written by Kelly McGonigal. She is a storyteller. She's a health psychologist. She understands literature and she puts it together in stories. It's called The Upside of Stress. And in the very first chapter, she talks about a research project that was done on humans. Quite an interesting longitudinal project on the response to stress. And there was like categories like, do you have stress in your life? What do you believe about your stress? Is it good or is it bad? When you have stress, is that a bad thing? Will that make you sick? Is that this? Or when you have a lot of stress in your life, how do you respond to it? You know, they asked all these different questions and then they tracked these people across their life. And as they got into their they looked at them and they saw that it wasn't the people who, because there was a category, do you have stress? No, man, my life is great. I never have any stress. There's always that group, right? And the group that lived the longest, hands down, were the group that said, I have stress in my life. It's a positive thing. And I look at stress as my opportunity to do new and different things. Hands down, outlived even the people who said, nah, stress doesn't bother me. Stress is a good thing. But the people who went earlier are the people who were afraid of their stress and felt like they had a bad response, like stress gave them worse problems. So they didn't, so their response to stress was not as good. What we're learning now is these little guys here in the gut actually govern our response to stress. So if we have all the little bugs in our gut that scream for sugar all the time, we're more likely to have a negative response to stress. Interesting, right?